All right, we are back for part two. Um, we are gonna just kick this off with rolling right into my team. So I think my team is firmly in the middle. As my obviously 1-1, I'm in seventh, but and sixth in total points. But um, everyone's dealing with injuries. My team is no losing AJ Brown definitely hurts. I think he might be out for the next couple weeks. I wouldn't be surprised if they just hold him out through the week five bye, and then just have him back home against Cleveland in week six. That's kind of what I'm expecting. Um, I mean, my team ultimately, I think, hinges on Anthony Richardson as I set it up to be, being my keeper. I was firmly in the camp that I think he could have monster weeks every week. Um, and pretty much do what Jalen Hurts did 2 years ago or 2 or 3 years ago when I had him as my quarterback, where he was just a machine with Shane Steichen. So we'll see. I ultimately think Richardson's gonna be fine. I know his schedule coming up here is pretty brutal. But I think he'll ultimately be fine, and I think he'll hover probably around that 23 points per game mark every week. Collins has been a monster. We touched on it earlier. He's the undoubted alpha in a really good passing offense with a really good quarterback. And he's you watch him play. He's 6'4", he's 215, he runs fast as hell, and he's awesome with the ball in his hands. So he's not like a jump ball target earner. He's just awesome. So he's holding it down. Malik Neighbors has been
Great.
great. He had 18 targets last week. He's probably the favorite for offensive rookie of the year outside of Brock Bowers, and I know Harrison will probably be there also with the quarterbacks not really, um, producing like they would need to be in consideration, at least from my standpoint. Um, Jacobs is third in the NFL in rushing right now. He's been such a steady presence. His volume is insane, especially with Jordan Love out. I don't expect that to go away at any time soon. Um, my RB2 spot is pretty questionable right now. I will see what happens with Mostert. I'm actively looking for an RB2 on the trade market. We'll see what happens there. Picked up Hunter Henry. I was surprised he went for as little as he did. I bumped it up to $7 Fab. I had it at five. I would have got him at five. And then I'm just pretty much playing my flexes between Dell and Xavier Worthy at this point, just based on matchup. So I ultimately like my team. I know, and I have the Jets defense. I do think that is a bit of an X factor because I think their schedule in the next few weeks is really nice. They play New England this week at home. They're home against Bo Nix, and then they go to London to play Darnold, and then they're back home against Josh Allen in Buffalo, and the Jets notoriously have had Josh Allen's number. So we'll see. I mean, I know my team is, I think, going to be pretty volatile week to week. But I ultimately think that, I'll be in pretty much contention. At least last week against you, I thought for sure I was going to be dead and my team
Yeah.
was going to put up a max of like 80 points. And then I ended up rounding out close to 110. So, any thoughts on my team as where things stand going into week three?
Yeah. I mean, you obviously broke it down pretty well. I mean, I think Anthony Richardson obviously is going to be a huge, yeah, the biggest piece for you because I think you mentioned, I mean, Nico Collins is great. You're going to have AJ Brown. So you have two studs. Malik Neighbors is getting all the volume. So I mean, right there, you have your two receivers and your flex pretty much lined up. Tight end, I mean, nobody has a great tight end, like you said earlier. In the first part of this pod, we really touched on only two guys. I think I saw there was only in the full point PPR league in terms of standings. There's only like 10 or 9 tight ends that have had, um, like more than like 10 points in each game. You know what I mean? It's crazy. Like in a full point PPR, they're still not even doing, or producing double digit points. So
Yeah.
Hunter Henry was getting a ton of volume. So at least last week. So I think that's a good flyer. I picked him up in another league as well. So yeah, it's just desolate out there in terms of tight ends. But yeah, I mean, most teams, I should say, that we broke down, even the top two point scorers, are lacking in that RB2 spot. So I mean, everyone's kind of scrounging for that next piece, we'll say, at least in terms of RBs. I mean, I just feel like that position's been pretty weak across the board in terms of depth. But I mean, Josh Jacobs, as a Packers fan, looks awesome. And I think even when Jordan Love comes back, he's still going to get the work. They want to run the ball and run play action off of that. So, and he looked great. I mean, the first game against the Eagles was a little shaky. He started getting his footing. I feel like in the second half. But I mean, God, he did all the work. He did all the work for us last week to get the win. So,
Hmm.
I like him in that LaFleur system of running the ball a decent amount, and I think they wanted to do that with Aaron Jones. They just could never. The guy could never stay healthy, and Josh Jacobs is a bruiser, man. They can give him the rock 20 to 25 times, and think if he stays healthy, he's gonna have a really good year, closer to that year where he led the maybe not as many touchdowns, but and last week he dropped one right at the 1 yard line for you, unfortunately.
I know. I
But
know. I was
that was
dying
that
when
was
that happened. I
killer.
was like, oh fuck.
That was
But yeah,
killer.
or yeah, he can carry it 20 to 25 times a week or 32 like he did last week.
Yeah,
But
that was insane.
it was funny to see the discourse online about Josh Jacobs after the first half of the Eagles game, people saying he's washed, and I think he's averaged
Hmm.
like 5.5 yards per carry since that. So we'll move to the last 1-1 team and just hit on them quickly is
Sure.
Aaron's team, the new name, new logo, new branding, new everything. Is there a more I'm gonna say this, and this might be a hot take. Is there a more universally thought of player who's a top five receiver at or a top five player at his position who doesn't necessarily produce like a top five receiver more than Jamar Chase? Because like for me, like I think Jamar Chase is awesome and he's so
Sure.
talented and he's so good. But like if you look at his stats, like everyone routinely thinks of him as just like, oh, he's a no-brainer top five receiver. But his stats aren't like he doesn't have AJ Brown stats. He doesn't have CeeDee Lamb stats. Like he doesn't have Justin Jefferson stats on his resume. And now he started slow again, like the Bengals always do. And I just want to see if, and I know this week he's probably going to destroy Washington. Like, I
Hmm.
don't think Jamar Chase is bad or anything. Like, he's awesome. But I just don't think Jamar Chase is in that upper echelon of receivers that he's universally thought of to be, in my opinion. So that's kind of where I land on Chase. I know it's a hot take that I don't think I don't even know if I would consider him like a top eight, top 10 receiver in the NFL. Like for me, I would much rather, if I'm starting a team, I would much rather have Nico Collins than Jamar Chase on my team. That's just me. I
Yeah,
know
I mean,
that's a hot take, and that would probably get me blocked by so many accounts online.
yeah, I don't. I mean, I think you know he's warranting or trying to warrant the highest paid receiver tag. Obviously, I mean that keeps coming out in terms of all the conversations and interviews, and I don't know. I just I love Jamar Chase. I obviously had him. I kept him that first year. His rookie year, I think, was his best year, or maybe the second year. I mean, one of those
Yeah,
two
that
years he had like
his rookie year
1,500
was his
yards.
best year. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, he went off. So I mean, I think since then, to your point, I think that whole team kind of lost a little bit of their mojo. I mean, Joe Burrow getting hurt, T. Higgins hasn't stayed healthy. I mean, it's been a kind of a mess in Cincinnati since they made the Super Bowl. So I mean, or I guess lost and could have made the Super Bowl. I think, right? Was that the year that they lost to the Chiefs? Um,
I think his rookie year was when they lost to the Chiefs. 2022 was when they lost to the Rams in the Super Bowl.
okay, yeah. So since then, I feel like the last 2 years has just been a mess in Cincy. But in any case, I don't think that's a horrible take by any means. I mean, you're expecting those guys to put up, 20 plus a week in terms of, and getting 10 targets a game. And I don't know, their pass offense just doesn't look like it's there. I mean, his team's kind of been disappointing overall. I mean, he's 1-1, but I mean, Mahomes hasn't really looked that great. Garrett Wilson hasn't really necessarily gotten off as strongly as he probably hoped for with Aaron Rodgers. That doesn't look like they still, I think, can come around. I mean, they had some nice plays towards the end of that game against Tennessee. That back shoulder catch was, or that over the shoulder catch that he had was pretty nuts.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, Connor's great. I mean, I think he's got a pretty solid team overall. I mean, his running backs are Connor and Mixon. I mean, Mixon's a little banged up, but I mean, those guys are workhorses in two pretty high powered offenses. So
Hmm.
I like Aaron's team. I don't think there's a lot of depth. Just kind of looking down on his bench. I mean, he kind of is what it is. So the injury bug definitely could hurt. We'll see with Joe Mixon, who he's going to have to play somebody in that flex. So it'd be interesting to see who he throws in there. But yeah, I mean, decent team. I think he's in the running in that mid tier. You know, kind of pushing for that playoff spot now that we're going to 7 teams. So
Hmm.
I think everything's kind of shaking out as is, at least early on here, in terms of just kind of going through these teams now and the first 2 weeks.
Yeah, I think yeah, I know I'm not sure how much he spent on Isaiah Likely. But it was surprising to me how much he came back down to earth and how little he was sort of involved in the game plan against
Hmm.
the Raiders. That was a little bit of a surprise. I thought, maybe it might be more of like a two tight end kind of thing, similar to how we saw previously with like the Eagles, where it was like Ertz and Goddard kind of playing off each other. But like, no, Andrews is still pretty firmly entrenched as the starter there. So, we'll see. I like Aaron's team. I wasn't trying to rip it apart that I don't think Jamar Chase is like he's gonna be like a zero for his team. Like he's awesome. But that I had to get that take out that I think we as a football collective, at least from what I see, I think we may overrate Jamar Chase a little bit for what his production has been. So well, let's move to the 0-2 teams. Kind of touch on them
Yeah.
pretty quickly. I at least for Ryan, I think Ryan's team is pretty strong. I mean, I don't know how if there's a bigger disappointment player in fantasy right now from what the expectations were than Michael Pittman.
Oh
Um,
God, I know.
he's not he's sort of in like a three-man rotation sort in terms of like who gets targets on an offense. He's not getting that many first looks off RPOs from what I was seeing. I don't really know what how it gets necessarily better because Pittman hasn't been a notorious touchdown scorer. So I think he can get more volume. I think he can kind of pick it up. But I think at best this year he's going to be like a mid-range wide receiver too. That's a little offset with how awesome Chris Godwin has been, though.
Yeah, he
And
has been.
I mean, moving Godwin back into the slot this year, he's just been a machine. So Godwin, he's a wide receiver one to me moving forward. Saquon has been awesome. Um, going to the Eagles. So Saquon and Henry, I think he's pretty locked in there. Andrews, I think will get going. He'll be fine. And then Brandon Ayuk, I mean, whenever someone misses on San Francisco and it's really concentrated, now it's just Ayuk and Kittle. Ayuk's just gonna
Mhm.
I think Ayuk's just gonna go nuts. So I think Ryan's team is set up to start really getting rolling here. Um, as we kind of move forward. So at least for the 0-2 teams, I'm not really concerned about Ryan's team kind of moving forward.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, nothing really much to add there. I mean, the Devo injury, like you said, I think that could finally get Ayuk a little bit more acclimated. Obviously sitting out all training camp. They're certainly going to make him a central focus, probably. In terms of that offense, at least in the passing game. So I think he's definitely going to have an uptick. You noted Pittman. I mean, yeah, Pittman's been super disappointing, especially with Richardson, kind of back and kind of seeing what that dynamic was going to be like. But they had a rough game in Green Bay offensively, so we'll see how they hopefully progress a little bit more in terms of that offense. And
Hmm.
yeah, Chris Godwin, number one receiver in PPR right now. It's pretty insane what he's doing in terms of the targets and the
Yeah.
receptions right now. Yeah, I like his team. To your point, I wouldn't be worried if I was Ryan, kind of staring at the rest of the league. So I think he'll
Yeah.
uh, he'll have a team that's going to be there.
Yeah, and I think at least for me, like I think it's been 2 weeks. I think I would straight up be starting Jameson Williams over Michael Pittman, kind of moving
Yeah,
forward.
it's true.
It's yeah. So we'll get to the current bottom three. I say the current bottom three because there's a gap between
I
Ryan's
agree.
team and then moving to Anthony in terms of like points scored. Um,
Poor
Anthony's
guy, man.
team, yeah, I mean,
Just
is
decimated.
losing CMC, losing David Njoku, losing Puka. I mean, that's rough. And
That's tough
there's
start.
always one manager every year that gets destroyed by injuries, especially like X factor injuries that you're counting on, and losing your first two picks, especially, the player who is number one overall, on
Yeah,
most boards. I would have taken CMC number one overall, if
sure.
he wasn't kept. It sucks, man. And, unfortunately, Anthony's fallen on that sword. But I mean, in terms of his team,
Not a
I
bad
know
team.
golf's, yeah, I mean, he's piecing it together. Ramondre Stevenson has been awesome to
Great.
start.
Yeah.
He's an undoubted workhorse on that team that wants to run the ball. They have a pretty good running system, even though their offensive line is a little bit shaky. I know this week, the Jets' run defense has been surprisingly terrible, to start. But New England, I think is down a couple offensive linemen, so we'll see. I think Ramondre will be fine. Singletary has been a workhorse. He's been awesome for the Giants, or
Mhm.
he's been pretty solid for the Giants. And then, Devonta Smith now with AJ Brown out, he should eat. Goff's just been really disappointing,
Yeah.
especially at least to start the year. I thought he was going to come out guns blazing. He's in a dome. He's in a really good offense. Just hasn't really been there. He's thrown a lot of picks, so we'll see. But I like Anthony's team. I think losing Njoku obviously hurts because I was big on Njoku.
Hmm.
But I think Anthony will be a tough out every week. Um, at least with what he's putting out, and he's got probably the best defense in the NFL. So,
Yeah.
got to find a way to get Rashid Shaheed in his lineup, though.
Yeah, I mean that's I think this might be the week that he might have to play him because Rashad White and that injury and
Yeah.
Bucky Irvin's definitely knocking on the door for some touches too. So,
Yep.
but yeah, I mean to your point, he's staying afloat. Anthony's for the last couple seasons, I feel like just hasn't taken priority as to like drafting a quarterback, and like he always had that bugaboo. I mean, he essentially lost was arguably the best team last year and lost because of that Brock Purdy. Not to say Brock
Yep.
Purdy's bad, but unfortunately the quarterback snake bit him again, I should say. I mean, now he's juggling either Jared Goff or Cousins. I mean, Cousins did look a little bit better in a night game in Philly, so he's going to have to play that flip a coin strategy at quarterback. But I mean, the rest of his team kind of can stay afloat, hopefully. But now they're talking, longer than the 4 week IR spots for both of those guys in terms of CMC and Puka. To your point, like I said, you losing your first two picks, one of them not even playing at all, and then Puka barely even got a half in before he went out. So
Yeah.
yeah, tough spot for Anth to kind of dig his way out of. But I mean, looking at his roster here, I mean, he's got guys that are at least. I mean, he put up a decent outing last week against Andy. I mean, Andy just threw up a 150 spot, so you're never
Yeah.
going to beat a guy with that. But I mean, he's putting up a respectful 105 or 110. I think he got to. So we'll
Yeah.
see. I think he'll be competitive, hopefully, based off this roster at least until he gets some guys back. But yeah,
Yeah.
tough draw.
Yeah. And we'll get to the two bottom teams in the standings and definitely in the power rankings. We'll get to Rick's team, who has not spent any fabs thus far. Um, I I think everyone on his team, at least from what he was drafted, I think from coming out of the draft, I think his team looked really solid, and I think everyone he was playing, I think had a really good outlook. I think everyone now has been taken down a tier, um, in terms of like where they were, because like I had Lamar in my tier one of quarterbacks with Allen and Hurts and Mahomes, and I think he's firmly in like the Anthony Richardson kind of fluctuating tier. I think he'll be fine. He always is, but he hasn't been like that monster Josh Allen level player. DJ Moore, we touched on the Chicago offense as a whole. Did you see DJ Moore in that game, like showing clips of him at all? He just looks like sort of checked out, and
That
I'm
last
not.
pass, he was like, he was so pissed. I mean, that
Yeah,
one that to the sideline, he just the guy looked so defeated. I mean, it's got to be a tough scene. I mean, the
yeah,
anticipation of the number one pick and what they expected, they were overhyping honestly Caleb Williams. Not to say that he's a bad player, but like the Bears just weren't a good team, and they didn't structure themselves all that much besides getting some skill position players and obviously the quarterback position. But yeah, I don't know. It's they could get better for him. I mean, they got weapons on the outside, but I mean, DJ Moore, I mean, Adunze, now Keenan Allen's hurt. I mean, you got to have time to throw to these guys, and he has no time back there. I mean,
yeah,
the minute he snaps the ball, it seems like that line is given up at least somewhere where a guy's on him. So, yeah, I
yeah.
agree with you on some of these takes. I mean, Amari Cooper, we're kind of running down the guys that again, I don't. He's been terrible. I mean, they're for a number one. Jerry Judy's the number one, really, if you look at the volume,
Yeah.
or where it's going, at least in the first two games. So, Jonathan Taylor again, kind of been disappointing for him to kind of start the year. I mean, double digits, got late points, I would say, in that second half against the Packers. I mean, they didn't do anything in the first half against us, but
Yeah. I don't
um,
think Jonathan Taylor played a snap in the fourth quarter of that game. And
I couldn't
I
believe
don't
it.
know, and I don't know, like I think Jonathan Taylor he'll be okay. Like I don't
Me too.
like I know Trey Sermon is their backup, but I think expectations for Jonathan Taylor need to be adjusted a little bit. I think they'll get, I mean, it's 2 weeks, so it's a pretty small sample size.
Yep.
But I don't think, I know Taylor, and in consensus rankings, he was like RB4, maybe RB5 in a PPR behind Gibbs. I think Taylor, like personally, and I'm not just saying this because he's on my team, but like personally, I would rather have Josh Jacobs over Taylor. I would rather
Mhm.
have um, James Cook over Jonathan Taylor. I think I would have rather have like maybe a couple other guys. So I think he's kind of a little bit closer to like the overall RB10 than he would be like RB5. But then again, I think Indy's offense will start clicking. Their offensive line is still really strong. Um, David Montgomery's been
Great.
good. He's a touchdown
Yeah.
machine on an offense that's going to run the ball. Kelsey again has kind of keeping with a theme here. He's been really disappointing.
Very bad.
And then Jackson Smith-Njigba I think is going to
Nice
be
game.
like, yeah, he's going to be a stable presence in his lineup kind of moving forward. But
Mhm.
man, Bears got to get it figured out, man. Their offense, they're running these like, with Shane Waldron, they did it last year with Seattle. Like they got to get it figured out where they're not throwing tight end screens to Gerald
I
Everett on the
just,
first
I
play of the
just,
game.
yeah, I know. There's a couple of those ones that I watched on that last game that were just behind the line of scrimmage. There's just, I mean, Dunze had a pretty nice look in the end zone. He should have came down with. I mean, there was a couple of
Yeah.
decent plays, but yeah, nothing stretching the field really, like you said. So I mean, we'll see. I mean, hopefully better days to come for Chicago. I mean, new quarterback, whole new offense, really. I mean, but I just don't think their
Yeah.
line's very good. But
Yeah,
yeah, I
especially
mean,
especially on the interior. He's got guys in his face like immediately.
yeah. So it's going to be we'll see what happens there. But I mean, in terms of Rick's perspective, I mean, he doesn't have any. He really needs those guys to consistently give him points like Kelsey, Amari Cooper, because he doesn't have any guys that are really going to pop outside of like a probably like a 20-point mark in terms of skill guys. And then I mean, Lamar's probably capped a little bit, like you mentioned. I mean, he might have a couple of those like 4 touchdown games, but I just don't see them being that high powered, in terms of an offense.
Yeah.
So, that 100 mark, it's going to be hard for him to see him have a couple, weeks where in terms of this lineup and how they're performing early on, getting to like a 130 or a 140. I mean, there's not guys that are going to put up, like I said, more than like a 20 spot for him. So we'll see.
Yeah.
I mean, it's very early on in the year, but yeah, just overall, just kind of a disappointing start, probably Rick's feeling from his team.
Yeah, consistent theme for Lamar and DJ Moore. I don't recall the Ravens having this questionable of an offensive line situation before. They traded Morgan Moses to the Jets. They let John Simpson walk, who also signed with the Jets. And they've been having some issues. And Lamar's never going to get. He's never going to take red zone carries. They're all going to go to Derrick Henry. So,
Hmm.
um, we'll see. I think Rick's team is like ultimately like solid though. I don't think it's
Hmm.
like a disaster. Like his bench is pretty good. I think his bench is actually one of the best benches in the league, ironically enough. But yeah, I
Sure.
think it's still really early. I know, and we've seen things change, so quickly. Now we'll get to Phil's team.
Phil.
Um, I have concerns with
Yeah.
Bill's team. And I don't think they're I don't think they're super detrimental where it can't be overcome, but there are major question marks for me with key pieces that he has on his team. And I think picking up Derek Carr was actually a really good move. I think,
Hmm.
we've seen Derek Carr have stretches where he's been awesome. And I think this is different, where I think this is actually sustainable because they have a really good offensive coordinator now and they're using a ton of motion, they're using a ton of play action. And I think that offense is just going to keep humming. Um, I'm very concerned about Jalen Waddle now. Um, it's different than Tyreek Hill because Tyreek Hill is a freak, and I know Waddle's a very, very good player, but I don't know how much volume they're going to get with Skylar Thompson to be able to go around, especially with Hill and HN getting theirs.
Hmm.
Um, I do like the stack with Carr and Olave. I think Olave is sort of like a positive regression candidate. Their offense is super concentrated with him, Shaheed, and Kamara. Bijan's awesome. I think if we were
Yeah.
redrafting today, I would take Bijan as the first running back off the board. Um,
Yeah,
Pollard
it's
has
great.
been great. Pollard's been a really good
Yep.
find. And then Aaron Jones has been pretty solid. So ultimately, I think his starting lineup is pretty solid.
Hmm.
I can't get there with Kyle Pitts, man.
Nah,
Like
man, he still sucks. It's crazy.
I and like I had hopes about Kyle Pitts. I also don't like having two of the same players from the Falcons
Yeah.
because what we've seen in week one, if their offense tanks, like it tanks. And Bijan's gonna get his floor is super stable, but man, with Kyle
Outside
Pitts,
that,
like
outside that touchdown, that's pretty much it.
yeah, like my thing with Pitts is like he was drafted as like the tight end seven, tight end eight, and he's just not getting looks enough to warrant that. And like there was one play, I think on the fourth down that Bijan got stuffed where like Pitts gets like driven back like 3 yards. And they're like you can't be on the field, man. Like if
Yeah.
you're gonna be a tight end that's going to be this game changing tight end you got to be able to block and you got to be able to like be on the field in all phases. And like I don't think Pitts is like warranting more targets is my concern. Because like if you're like if you're throwing the ball, especially with Darnell Mooney now having a really
Just
solid
gonna
game and
say
he's
that.
stretching the field, London's the alpha there. He's gonna start commanding more and more targets. Bijan's a huge part of their team. Tyler Algier is still a huge part of their
Yeah.
running game. Like why would you throw to Kyle Pitts, especially if, you're not really giving him these like easy looks with, run after catch ability. So that's my big concern on Kyle Pitts. I've never really been a Kyle Pitts fan, but man, outlook's pretty rough right now.
Yeah, I mean, there's just not a lot of like besides Bijan. Bijan's been awesome for fantasy purposes. I mean, he looks the part as like an alpha, like top three pick, which he basically was in the majority of leagues, I'll say. To your point, I mean, if we knew the CMC injury, I'm sure there'd be a lot more people taking Bijan at one, or Brees, just in terms of the volume that those guys get in passing work and in carries. So it just like there's nothing that wows me. I mean, it doesn't have a bad team, Phil, by any means. Like we just went over his running backs. Like I like them, like Bijan, Pollard, and Jones. Like those are three really good guys to have. Like he's pretty much solidified there. And you would think Olave, Waddle, okay, start of the year, those guys look pretty good. But I still think, I mean, Olave, even though he is arguably their number one, um, I feel like Kamara gets so much work in the offense that sometimes they're passing. I mean, not yet. Derek Carr has been actually playing pretty well in the first 2 weeks. But I can see them being a little bit conservative in their approach in terms of chucking it down the field. I mean, what's he got there? I mean, yeah, first week, I mean, they've dominated both weeks, which is kind of crazy. So I guess they didn't really
Yeah.
necessarily need to do too much, but yeah, that'll be an interesting thing because, like you said, I mean, Waddle definitely would scare me now. I mean, without Tua, for the foreseeable future, possibly the year. I mean, we'll see if
Yeah.
he comes back.
Yeah.
I just that Miami offense is going to be all HN and check downs to Tyreek, I think.
Yep.
Unless they get another quarterback that we don't know of, obviously, that more to come. But yeah, so I guess out of the three bottom feeders, we'll say, I mean, even though, Ryan is 0-2 as well, I would be the most concerned probably if I was Phil out of all of them, just based off of like total team outlook. And then bench
Yeah.
wise, I mean, nothing. I mean, got the handcuff for Bijan. That's good because Algier does look still serviceable. Dallas Goddard, to your point about the Pitts play, like, I mean, I don't, I just, there's too many mouths to feed in Philly. I mean, I feel like that could be a viable play just to flip those guys, but Goddard hasn't really shown much. I
With
mean,
yeah, with AJ Brown out now,
it's true.
I would be straight up starting Goddard over Pitts every week.
Good take.
I just need to see it from Pitts, and it can't just be a broken play touchdown. You know what I mean?
It's true. It's true.
And then I think the problem is, and I think you see this with teams that are underachieving and don't put up that many points, is like you can't have like grenades on your team where it's just flat out misses with draft picks. And I'm not saying they're like it's easy in hindsight, and I'm not saying at the time they were bad picks, but like Terry McLaurin has been a
Terrible.
zero.
Yeah.
And like he's never been a notorious touchdown scorer. And the most he's probably going to get this year is what, like four, maybe? Because like they're running
Sure.
this like horizontal offense that Cliff Kingsbury always runs, and I thought it would be different. But it's kind of just like the same. And then, with Caleb, like Phil, if you're listening to this, man, you don't have to hold on to Caleb Williams anymore. Like,
Yeah, it's true.
I mean, you know, but we'll see. I mean, and at least for this week, like he's got some pretty good outlooks. Like Caleb could come out against Indy and play really well because their passing defense has been really suspect. Same with Olave. I think this could be a really get right spot for Olave and Carr. So I'm not.
Yep.
I'm not saying like his team can't go off like Tony Pollard has a good matchup against Green Bay, but
Mhm.
it's tough. So we'll see. I think from the 0-2 teams, I think Phil is, for me, at least the one I'm a little concerned with, in terms
I'd
of
agree.
the outlook moving forward. But even with that said, a silver lining, it's still week 3. So, you
Exactly.
know, can't really make
Very early.
any big decisions at least, until week 5. So, that is the basic rundown on all the teams. Let's get to these matchups. We're just going to pick these winners pretty
Quick.
quickly.
Yep.
So we'll start. Let's start with Andy's team because he's number 1 seed. We'll go Andy and
Okay.
Arby's. One team is going to be 3-0. So, I'm
Mm,
kind of just
tight one.
going with who I give the edge to on each thing. I, 112 to 110. I think Andy's gonna pull this one. I think he's just at full strength. I think it's
Yeah.
so hard with Brees and Achan and all of his players. I mean, he's even might start Javonte Williams. I don't really think that matters that much. I think Adams could go nuts. Um, yeah, I think Andy's gonna start 3-0.
Yeah. I'm gonna agree. I give a slight edge to Andy overall. It's gonna be probably a pretty tight one, and there's a couple outlooks on RB side that he's gonna still have to wait to the end of the week to figure out who he's playing. So I'll give the slight edge to Andy.
All right, we'll go to the
The
next
Bastards.
matchup with Logan,
Ooh,
with the
this is a good one.
Bastards and Nils. This is a really good matchup. I need to peruse this real quick. Yeah, I'm gonna take Nils. Um, I know,
I like
man,
Nils too.
I really like Nils' team. I mean, I think the Kyler matchup is going to be a shootout again. Um, I think the Kyler and McBride stack is gonna. I think McBride's going to catch at least one touchdown. I really like Jordan Mason in this spot, and I really like playing San Francisco's D in LA.
Yeah,
That said, I do think Brock Bowers is just he's such a solid bet for double digits every week. I don't know how he
yeah.
doesn't get that. And
I
then,
looked at he's like 80.
Kamara, yeah, Kamara can go nuts against Philly, but I am concerned about Miami's matchup this week in Seattle. Seattle's defense with Mike McDonald has been really solid, and they're getting a ton of pressure. I think Boye Mafe, their edge defender, I think he was like a second round pick 2 years ago. I think he's like second in total pressures in the NFL. Um, but and
So it's
I know, yeah. So I am gonna pick Nils here.
yeah, I'm gonna go with Nils too. I just think there's a little bit that RB2 spot just like just glaring at me in terms of just like or flex, whatever you want to kind of move these guys around. But Madison, and then he's got Jordan Mason. I don't know. I feel like there's a little bit of ground that he's given up there. And I don't see, to your point, where he's going to be making up. I don't expect a big Kamara game, but who knows? I mean, New Orleans has been on fire in their home, and Philly just let Atlanta drive the field in 30 seconds. So who am I to say that Kamara can't put up a couple tutties again? So he's going to
Yeah,
need that, though, I think, to make up for it. But I give a slight edge to Nils on this one as well.
yeah, yeah. And I think in terms of Madison, I think Vegas is just gonna kind of control that game. So I think it could be a more Zamir White game than Alexander Madison. We'll move to the third seed, which is Steve. Steve and Phil.
Okay. Oh, Josh Allen on Monday night.
Against Jacksonville. Are there two Monday night games this week?
Yeah, yeah, there is.
There is.
Yeah, they're like only an hour apart. I think the other one was
Is it Cincy, Washington?
yes.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. Yeah. I think this can be a lot closer than I'm thinking in my head, but
I go Steve.
I ultimately think Steve's going to get it. But again, like it wouldn't surprise me if it's a lot tighter and the Carr and Olave, if Olave gets his first touchdown of the year.
It's true.
And Bijan kind of gets his against KC, and then Pollard gets his work too. So I think it could be closer. It wouldn't surprise me if Phil gets gets his first win, but I'm gonna go with Steve here.
Yeah, I'm gonna go with Steve as well. I think I could see a 30 pointer out of Josh Allen on Monday night. So that's gonna be the dagger, I think, the nail in the coffin for him having to wait to watch Monday Night Football. But
Yeah,
I'm gonna give it the so far it's been chalk. We've been kind of going with the favorites, but
yeah,
yeah, I gave it to Steve here.
yeah. And also like there's nothing worse if you have a lead and you know Josh Allen is there just waiting to drop the hammer on Monday. It's not a fun, not a fun spot to be. We'll move to my matchup with Ryan. Man, I think Ryan's team looks solid this week. He's just got to play Jamison Williams over Michael Pittman. Um, but
Damn,
we'll see.
got a
I
high
mean,
projection.
it's tough. I Mostert might play, and I do think if
Yeah,
he does, he might be leaned on a little bit more than he was. I'm not fooling myself into thinking he's gonna like compete with Achan for touches. But TBD if Mostert is my starting RB2 in that spot. Um, we'll see what happens. But I think Ryan's team at least I think he's just got players who I think can just bury me. Um,
yeah, I'm gonna have
I
to
think
agree with
God,
that.
yeah, I think Godwin, especially at home, I think Sertan's going to be on Evans, and I think Godwin's just going to continue to eat. I think I think IU can just shred LA, so we'll see. Um,
Yeah, and
but
I think he just got his even with that swap that you're mentioning for Pittman and Williams. I just think it's. I mean,